Hi, I'm Morris, and I'm here to talk to you about finesse in modern Tetris. Optimization of finesse is easiest before any muscle memory is developed, and can both eliminate a lot of mechanical issues that may impact speed later, as well as speed up improvement in the beginner experience earlier on in a player's career. This video is primarily aimed towards newer players, but even if you're an experienced player who may or may not be using two-step finesse right now, I hope this video will convince you to at least advocate learning it to your friends who might just be starting out. Let's begin. Finesse is a term that seems like it has a lot of definitions and can be confusing, but I'll separate the three main ways I see it being used. Finesse is the way you press your keys on your keyboard to move your piece to the space that you want it to go on the board. Two-step finesse is a mapping of inputs for each piece to a placement on the board that will get that piece there in the least amount of key presses. When you get told to learn finesse, it generally means to learn two-step finesse. Let's see it in action. To get my S piece to the highlighted space, two-step finesse says to first hold my right key to DAS to the right, then rotate counterclockwise, then hard drop. Two-step finesse is named as such because you can place the vast majority of pieces with just two key presses, aside from the hard drop, which just places the piece immediately. Finally, the finesse stat on Gestris, or finesse faults on Tetrio, is the number of wasted key presses off of the optimal number. Doing the same S-piece placement instead by rotating clockwise, then tapping right 3 times, would result in 2 finesse faults as I wasted 2 key presses. Putting it all together, finesse is the way you move your pieces to a certain spot, the most optimal way being called two-step finesse, and improving your finesse means reducing your amount of finesse faults. Note that many players develop finesse that is close to optimal just through playing the game, and a lot of the top players, especially older ones that started playing before a lot of resources were available, don't actually perfectly adhere to two-step finesse, but that doesn't mean it doesn't have its benefits and that you shouldn't learn it. The biggest misconception about finesse that was floating around when I started playing the game was that it was the #1 thing that you needed to practice to be fast, propagated by random hard drop users and this video by Huawei. Learning and practicing finesse is not the main component of speed in this game, and it would be unreasonable to expect to drop your 2-minute sprint time by 30 seconds just because you can do all the inputs perfectly. While yes, your finesse faults and key presses become a larger barrier to speed as you get further down, the #1 barrier to speed in this game in almost all cases is finding a spot for your piece, not just putting it there. But herein lies probably the biggest benefit of learning finesse, especially as a newer player. Finesse is probably the only truly mechanical skill that you can improve in Tetris. It's just muscle memory. In a game where being completely dialed in and devoting all your brain power to visualizing ahead is so important, you don't want to be wasting anything on figuring out how to maneuver your piece. While you'll slowly accumulate this mechanical skill over time, there's certainly an argument to be made for doing focused practice on it earlier on. Worrying about both where the pieces are going and how you're getting them there is a lot to handle when you're just starting out, so we should just focus on them one at a time, the same way we learn anything else. With that out of the way, the only actual reason you shouldn't learn finesse is if you're really overwhelmed by the idea of overcoming a seemingly arbitrary mechanical barrier. Personally, as a Super Smash Bros. Melee player before I started playing Tetris, I was pretty psyched to overcome a seemingly arbitrary mechanical barrier, so I learned two-step finesse pretty early, at around the 1:30 sprint time. But I can definitely understand that a lot of people aren't like me and wouldn't be excited to learn something like this. I've had my mind changed a few times on whether new players should learn finesse or not, and I've been hesitant to recommend it when I do coaching. In the end though, I think it's definitely something that should be taught unless the person is really overwhelmed by the idea, in which case, I just encourage that person to enjoy the game and have fun. It's not everyone's goal to improve as quickly as possible or do everything perfectly, and that's completely fine. But here are the main arguments for why a new player should practice their finesse. Finesse is easier to learn the earlier you decide to learn it. There's no existing muscle memory to override. Finesse has more benefits than most people realize the earlier you decide to learn it. Not worrying about your pieces is something a lot of experienced players take for granted. And finally, as a newer player, there's honestly not very much to work on besides just playing the game and improving your base stacking ability, which you really have to grind in before you learn anything more complicated. There's diminishing returns to just focusing on the same thing over and over again, and if there's nothing else to learn, you might as well learn finesse. And if you're going to be focusing on how to move your pieces around, why not learn how to do it optimally? Well, that's the case for focusing on finesse. Again, if this is all really complicated and overwhelming as a newer player and you don't want to worry about any of this, I completely understand. Feel free to just close this video now and come back to it whenever you want. Now, for those of you who are excited to learn, let's dive in. Here we are, finally, the actual guide portion of this video. It can be really confusing to learn finesse to start with, so the best way is to apply it and learn it in stages. While it might seem like learning finesse is just memorizing a ton of inputs, a lot of the inputs are pretty intuitive and can be guided by a few principles. Before we begin though, the most important thing to focus on when working on finesse is to never move a piece before you have a spot picked out for it in your brain. Conceptualize how you're going to move your piece to where it's going to go before you press any of the keys, instead of just moving to feel fast. Not only will this work on your finesse, but it's also key to improving your ability to visualize the pieces, which is probably the most important skill in Tetris. Now, let's begin. The most basic finesse mistake that all players should stop making is rotating their pieces 3 times in a row. When stacking regularly, there is no reason to ever rotate a piece 3 times. Just rotate it the other way once. If you don't take anything else from this video, just don't triple rotate. This is simple enough that you can try to work on it without any focused practice, just during your regular play. Personally, unbinding my clockwise rotation off of the up arrow to be right next to my counterclockwise rotation helped force me to work on this instead of just spamming the up arrow, but obviously this isn't necessary. Just focus on not doing it. When you want to move a piece close to the wall, instead of tapping a bunch of times, you should DAS or hold down the key towards the wall. When you want to move a piece 1 off of the wall, you should DAS to the wall, then tap the key opposite back off of the wall. A general rule of thumb is that the most times you should be tapping a piece over is 2, and the most times you should be tapping off of the wall is 1. Basically, don't triple tap or DAS to the wall when you just need to go a few spaces over. Again, this is simple enough to apply without too much thought, and you can just try to be mindful of this in your games. Try them out in the linked gestures map. Up next is the concept of DAS rotate. Rotating a piece can actually move it off of the wall, and this is pretty easily seen with the L, J, and T pieces. Notice how if I want to put the T piece here, if I rotate it first and then DAS-Tapback, that's 3 key presses plus the hard drop. But if I DAS first and then rotate, then the piece ends up in the position and orientation I want without the extra tapback. Rotating after you DAS is the important concept here. Orientation can affect the position of the piece. Try this out in the linked gestures map and focus really hard on rotating after you DAS for the L, J, and T pieces during your regular play. The most difficult pieces to learn are the pieces that only have 2 orientations. Yes, rotating the S, Z, and I pieces clockwise and counterclockwise does different things, even if they look the same. Again, orientation affects position. Which way you rotate each piece will shift the piece, making which way you rotate especially important for getting these pieces where you want optimally. My rule of thumb for you is that generally, rotating counterclockwise will result in a position shifted left, and rotating clockwise will result in a position shifted right. Understanding the finesse for these pieces is especially difficult, and it's honestly easiest just to memorize them, so I've set aside maps specifically for these pieces. As you're working through these stages, you might want to start adjusting some of your game settings and use some tools to help you focus on finesse. First, you can turn on this setting in Gestures or Tetrio to make a sound when you make a finesse fault. This is the least intrusive way to work on your finesse, as the game will still let you keep playing if you make a mistake. But try not to tune the sound out. Second, the one that is recommended the most often, for good reason, is Tetris. This is a Tetris client purpose-built as a finesse trainer. It'll stop you from placing a piece with a finesse fault and let you redo it while instructing you how to do it properly. This is a really strong tool that I recommend you use often as a warm-up or just to play as you learn. Third, if you really hate the feeling of Tetris, and maybe yourself, you can try turning on the restart on finesse fault setting. This will restart any run that you're doing if you make a finesse mistake. This will really force you to learn finesse whether you like it or not. I personally have never used it, but it can be a true test of your finesse once you feel like you've really mastered it. Overall though, finesse is just something that you're going to have to focus on improving. The tools aren't perfect, and at the end of the day, this won't come naturally. I have an idea that the best way to teach finesse would be something like those programs that teach you touch typing, but that doesn't exist yet. I might work on something like that, but I'll keep you updated. Either way, I really do hope you'll stick with your finesse training and enjoy the improvement. Good luck!